And joining us now here in Washington, Democratic Congresswoman Karen Bass of California. Congresswoman, welcome back.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and happy anniversary.
Thank you. You just heard the conversation with Senator Graham, and I want to focus in on this point that he emphasized on police reform. He and Senator Scott say they are willing to compromise on lifting immunity, but not for the individual police officer, lifting immunity so that this is a civil suit. We're not talking about criminal implications here. You could sue the police department. And the argument is, look, the money isn't with the individual cop, it's with the police officer. And if there's a bad cop, the department will get rid of them anyway. Would you be willing to go for that on immunity? Sue the police department, not the officer?
Well, let me tell you, first of all, we're going to have to negotiate that. But the intent of this is we have to find a way to hold officers accountable so this type of behavior ends. You said, well, if the officer was bad, he'd get fired anyway. Well, actually, a lot of the time, that's not the case. For example, Derek Chauvin had multiple complaints against him. As a matter of fact, after he is convicted, there's an investigation, or considering an investigation, on previous abuse.
But are you willing to blow up this deal over that issue?
I don't know if I'm willing to blow up the deal. I don't consider that blowing it up. But we do have to look at ways. Now, if Lindsey Graham and Tim Scott can show us some other way to hold officers accountable, because this has been going on for just decades, and officers right now are not really held accountable. Let me give you an example. In Minneapolis, for instance, if Chauvin had not been convicted, even though he was fired, do you know that he could go through arbitration and that police chief has no ability not to rehire him? So we have got to figure out how to stop this, and holding officers accountable is key.
I want to turn to another part of our conversation. You heard Senator Graham's answer about systemic racism in this country.
Yes.
And he says there isn't. And that continuing to talk about this is running the country down.
Well,
your response?
My response is, at some point in our country's history, we have got to figure out a way to talk about race where we can talk about it objectively and people don't feel individual guilt. You can look back at our history's laws, and over time there were many laws that were put in place that were absolutely racist. And over time those laws might have changed, but the conditions haven't changed. You can look at each of our institutions. Why is there such massive inequality when it comes to education, when it comes to health care? Why does that exist? And so we have to figure out a way to talk about it. Right now, to say it doesn't exist does not help anyone.
I want to finish by taking a look, along with you, at the police shooting this week of 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant. Here's the video.
Hey, hey, get down, get down, get down, get down.
Now, the police video makes it clear. Take a look right there, Congresswoman. She was wielding a knife, and when the police officer shot her, she was about to stab that girl right next to the car. And yet here is how White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki responded to the shooting.
We know that police violence disproportionately impacts Black and Latino people in communities, and that Black women and girls, like Black men and boys, experience higher rates of police violence.
Congresswoman, wasn't there a knee-jerk reaction in this country? You heard it from Jen Psaki, you heard it from a lot of other people. Police violence, when in fact this wasn't police violence. This was Officer Reardon shooting, intervening to save the life of the girl who was about to be stabbed.
Well, let me just say that oftentimes when this happens, absolutely there's an emotional reaction. But what Jen Psaki said, I agree with. Whether it applies to this case or not, I think is not the issue. You also had Adam Toledo, 13-year-old child. You know, he had a gun, he dropped it, he raised his hands.
But don't we need to be able to distinguish between cases?
Yes.
Between Derek Chauvin, that was murder, and this, which looks to me like a righteous shooting.
We absolutely need to distinguish, but we also need to look at policing overall. And one of the things that I hope we really address is maybe the focus needs to be on de-escalation. I know police officers are taught to shoot to kill. A lot of people raise, well, why couldn't he have shot her in the leg? Why couldn't he have done all these different things? The point is, we have got to come up with a way to stop. There's so many people being killed in this country.
Congresswoman.
So de-escalation and looking at the root causes of the problem.
Congresswoman Bass, thank you. Thanks for coming in, and we'll be following talks that we hope will lead to a compromise on police reform in the next month.